What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a DLC review for the Lord of Nothing DLC for Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. A sizable DLC that contains a standalone story on top of some content that also relates to the main game, which comes in addition to 15 brand new archetypes or subclasses to play, on top of even further advancements made by the patch 2.2 update dropping at the same time, which also brings some sweeping changes. So a few things here at the beginning. I've already talked about the 15 new archetypes that are coming with this DLC, so I'm not going to cover them much here. I will post that link in the description if you're curious, but a lot of them are looking very good. It's a mixture of homebrewed stuff as well as official archetypes, all added into the game, which is nice to see. Now, in relation to patch 2.2, I'll likely be covering that tomorrow, as I do not currently have access to the full patch notes, though I am aware it is making some big changes, such as a bunch of tweaks to the Assassin Prestige class to make it actually usable, alongside just small changes like the Blood Kineticist finally getting blood-related animations, instead of all of it just looking like water. But again, don't have the full patch notes, so I'll likely cover that in tomorrow's video. So today we're just going to focus on the DLC. Now, for those who don't know, Lord of Nothing is actually a follow-up to one of their previous DLCs, Through the Ashes, which sees the beginnings of this story. It's not mandatory that you play that before this one, but it does introduce quite a few of the characters. Though in this DLC, we are going to be traveling to an ice realm alongside a few other planes of existence, but the ice realm in particular belongs to the fallen demon lord Sithud, which sees us traversing a few different planes and picking up shards of Sithud, which forms one of the main, I would say, systems of this DLC. Now, beyond that, story-wise, I won't spoil too much outside of saying that I enjoyed it. It relates back to the main campaign, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, and it can potentially lead to one of the most impressive boss fights this game has to offer, with a potential full 10 phases. But let's talk about starting the DLC. As this is a follow-up to Through the Ashes, which is a DLC with multiple endings, you can import your save file from that DLC into this one to start with the character you've already played, or you can start as a new character using potentially one of the new archetypes. If you choose that option, you'll be given a slightly different introduction that effectively allows you to choose the main ending for the DLC the first time around, which will then change your start a little bit, though it will kind of quickly bring everything together. Once you've got that sorted out, however, the DLC does bring a few new characters into the fold. In addition to Rekarth and Sindri, who were with us previously, we will be introduced to Stalmar, who is not a companion, but is an angel of Sarenrae, which is actually the second angel of Sarenrae they've put in their games, starting to think they might like that goddess a little bit. Stalmar is largely there to give you a bit of guidance in what you're supposed to do, and he also has a tragic backstory, and what happens to him is ultimately up to you, which is a somewhat similar case for the new companion character, Pinta. Pinta is a bard who also happens to be a cyborg or an android of sorts. She's been trapped in this realm for quite some time, and is happy to lend a hand if it means getting back to Galarian to do regular things. She's an interesting character, and you'll learn more about her as the DLC unfolds, of course, and you can potentially take Pinta, Rekarth, Sindri, and yourself alongside the default Through the Ashes companions, all the way from level 5 to level 10 if you want. The DLC does start at level 5, even if you make a new character. They will be automatically leveled to 5, and then the DLC is going to end around level 10 for you, which you're going to reach by diving into different planes looking for the shards of Sithud as you deal with all sorts of odd situations. But I've referenced the shards a few times, so let's talk about those. You'll encounter your first one very early on in the DLC, but the shards are effectively sort of mini Mythic Path mechanics in that every time you pick up a shard, you're going to be able to take on a pretty strong ability that will augment your regular abilities. However, these come at the cost of a downside, usually a penalty of some sort to various roles, and each companion can only have up to 3 shards on them as well. I do enjoy this. It kind of mixes things up a little bit and lets you play around with some different abilities that you wouldn't get otherwise that aren't mythic in nature either. And what's more, this actually plays a narrative role in the DLC as well, because the shards, as the game tells you, are soul shards of Sithud. and thus his evil influence starts to work on you the more of these shards you take on, which is why you can only have 3 of them in a single person. But the more of these shards you have, the more difficult will checks you'll have to pass in order to avoid certain choices or distinctions, and how you move through the DLC and deal with those consequences can lead you up to a potential 5 different endings for the DLC. But I will say of those endings, there are really 2 major outcomes to be aware of. Which brings us to how this relates back to the main campaign. After you play through this DLC, if you'd like to play through the main campaign, once you reach Act 5, it will be possible to import your Lord of Nothing DLC save, which will then lead to a new location and dungeon. And what you find here largely depends on how the DLC ended for you. One of those endings leads you to a potentially wild boss fight, really above and beyond in terms of both mechanics and things going on. And I don't want to spoil it, but I'd be very interested in hearing what people think of it when they run into it. But again, that's just one possibility. And then as a final note, where Through the Ashes was much more about surviving in a almost hopeless situation, Lord of Nothing is much more free with resources and gear and equipment, etc., so you can pretty freely access vendors in certain areas, alongside finding much better gear than what was available previously, so it kind of loses that sort of Survivor-esque feel, and plays a little bit more normally, you could say. And that, I would say, is just about everything you need to know about the DLC specifically, though again, I will be doing a video on the patch in particular, as it's looking to be a significant update to the game. But as for this DLC, I think there's a lot to like here. If you have Season Pass 2, you'll get this automatically, but if you're looking at it individually, if it follows the pricing of all of their other DLC, which has all pretty much been $12.99, then I think this one is offering a significant amount of content, both in terms of the standalone campaign, what it adds to the main campaign, and the 15 new archetypes. Now, for me, I would say really the only big downside of this DLC is if you don't own the previous one and you get tossed into this one, it can be a little bit awkward because they're from 2 different season passes, as the first part of the DLC was from Season Pass 1, and this one is, of course, from the second one. So if you want to buy this one just for, say, the archetypes, it makes for an odd barrier to the beginning of the story. And again, you don't necessarily need to play the beginning of it. It does just make the whole thing like a little bit awkward. But otherwise, if you enjoy the rest of the game, this is certainly going to add a lot more interesting content for you via this 5 to 10 hour DLC and its addition to the main campaign. Ultimately, even more ways to play an already great game, which makes it pretty easy to recommend as long as they don't do anything crazy with the pricing, though literally all of them have been $12.99 up to this point, so that's likely what it will be. And while I don't have that final price in front of me, because this is going live right as this video is, it'll be pretty easy to check. That is going to do it for me, though. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed this look at the DLC. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.